Welcome to HAA's Expert Exchange, where we address real questions with expert answers. My name is Morgan Taylor. I'm the editor of Abode Magazine at HAA, and I'm going to moderate the session today. Today's Tuesday, June 30th, and we are talking about application fraud. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. For our audience today, please ask any questions that you have in the Zoom chat box or in the comments on Facebook if you are joining us via Facebook Live today. Once we get through the questions we curated, we'll get to your questions. This is a micro webinar, so we're going to try to keep it short and sweet. If you do have any further questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to myself, mtaylor@haaonline.org or com@haaonline.org. And just a disclaimer, we are not public health experts. The general information provided by HAA member companies in this session is a resource, and it's not intended as legal advice. Please consult with your management company or property owners to address specific issues and to form your own company guidelines. So with that, let's get started. Again, we're talking about application fraud today with Randy Patton of CoreLogic. Randy Patton is a senior professional in sales at CoreLogic with over 15 years of experience in the multifamily industry in a broad range of areas, including screening, online leasing, lease documents, renters insurance, and websites. Randy supports the HAA partnership by helping to expand the RCR presence for Houston owners and management companies. He holds a CAS credential, and has been a licensed insurance agent for 13 plus years. Randy is regarded as the industry expert on application fraud and identity theft, and has helped create awareness for members at many public safety outreach and education seminars on behalf of HAA. So hi, Randy, how are you?
Oh, doing great, Morgan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're excited to have you today. There's been heightened amount of application fraud as of recently. So we want to ask you some questions today to hopefully help our owners and management teams wade through these issues.
Sure.
So let's get right into it. Let's talk about some of the most common examples of application fraud right now.
Okay, good. Just real quick, I want to just kind of preface it with kind of some, pre-COVID numbers that we saw. One of the companies out there that works primarily with identity theft and applicant fraud would kind of just peg between like a 1% and 3% of your applications were fraudulent. But however, already multifamily was, well into the online leasing. We have a lot of applicants they want instant gratification. They want everything online. So we're kind of already going down that road. So that same company would say, well, if you're using any sort of online leasing, that's probably closer to about 10%. And then CoreLogic also did, some data of their own, probably, several thousand applicants, probably 10,000+ applicants we looked at. And we had about 28% of them would come back with medium or high risk fraud. And again, this is, pre-COVID-19. So you could already tell that in Houston, we're seeing some significant issues with applicant fraud or possible fraud. So what we kind of see a lot of is, we'll go ahead and start it with, kind of like the fake IDs. I mean, that's something we've been dealing with a lot. But as COVID-19 hit, we started moving into, the social distancing, almost exclusively trying to move to online leasing. And then also you had the unfortunate side of things with COVID, where you had millions and millions of people being furloughed or laid off. So there was kind of maybe a sense of desperation of getting approved for housing. So once we look into that, one of the things with the fake IDs, it's not necessarily like the typical driver's license, things like that. But I've heard a lot of people complain about the temporary or paper IDs because those are very, very easy to manipulate. particularly in an online setting. If you're going to scan a paper document, it's very hard to tell if it's real or if some of those artifacts were just caused by a scan or a fax machine, versus someone manipulating that information. And then we kind of go from there to a lot of the stuff with verifying employment and rental histories, things like fake pay stubs. I mean, it's all over there where you can just go out there and get a fake pay stub. And a lot of companies are out there that you kind of pay for a service to where they'll provide a falsified, verification of employment and maybe even rental history. And then also kind of moving from there, with the CPNs, those are kind of hard with kind of like fake socials, fake data information, people doing what we call identity manipulation or synthetic fraud, which you may hear that called also as Frankenstein fraud, where they just kind of use just different pieces of information, maybe even not my real name, not my date of birth, different addresses, all different kinds of things to get approved at your apartment communities. And then one of the more recent things I've heard a lot about are people doing chargebacks on credit cards when using, a payment company. They'll let it ride for a month or two and then kind of call the company and say, nah, those are fraudulent charges. And then that gets charged back to the management company or the owners.
Yeah, a lot going on there.
Yes.
And I think you mentioned fake rental history, applicants claiming to have lived with or currently living with family members, but the reality is that they're actually in the process of getting evicted.
Correct.
And you touched on CPNs really quickly before we move on. I just want to go over what exactly that means.
Okay. So they're usually called credit profile numbers or credit privacy numbers. So what we see is a lot of people will just abbreviate just CPNs, and they're kind of passed off as like a secondary social is kind of how it's marketed. And essentially what this does is it allows an applicant to use a different social, almost like if they just came in and said they don't have a social at all, to hide potential like bad credit or rental history information.
So it gives you a fake social security number and a fake rental history, essentially.
Correct. And some of even the companies out there that are supplying the CPNs as a kind of a pay as service, we've seen it probably as low as $20 to $30 up to a few $100s for them to provide these services. And some of them even go as far as supplying the fake pay stubs, also supplying a number for the leasing agents to call to verify income and employment. And then also the same thing with the rental history. They'll supply a secondary number for the leasing agents to call just to see if they have, a glowing record with that previous landlord. And of course, you're just you're calling someone that's already going to lie to you to say, yeah, they had a great, rental history with us. And they can even go as far as I've seen someone offering to help set up utilities and provide like fake Social Security cards.
Wow.
Yeah.
So assuming that since we are in the age of social distancing and, leasing offices closing, reopening, closing again, let's just assume that all applications today are online. What are all these issues? What are some of the best practices to avoid fraudulent applications?
Okay. Well, there's obviously, we'll get into this probably later, but there are, services that many other, companies provide that'll help you out. But also there are some things that you can do to better help or protect yourself. First with, we had mentioned the IDs and the paper IDs. It's very easy to fake those. But at the same time, you can probably get the real IDs within 7 to 10 days, I think is the normal time frame to get the real ones. And you can have them or require the applicant to bring those in before they get their keys or lease. That's one thing you can do. Also look for the alerts on the credit report to say if anything is not, jiving, like if it's Social Security number does not exist, or if it is, maybe attached to a deceased person or anything like that. There's several alerts to look out for. Going from there on best practices, if you are looking for like verification of employment and income, one of the things I suggest, there's a free service. Most states use what's called the Secretary of State Business Search. In Texas, it's different. It's the Texas Comptroller, but you can just go do an online search, Google, Bing, whatever you use. Just go in there, just type in Texas Comptroller Business Search, type in the business name, and then it makes you do the little captcha thing where you have to select on the, the pictures with buses or, sidewalks or, traffic lights, whatever it is. And then you can go in there and actually see if that business is a legitimate business. If it's in good standing, when it was organized and all that stuff. So it can at least tell you if that business is doing business in Texas.
So I've heard that looking at a pay stub, you can or a fake pay stub, there's things that you can see on there that would be different than a real pay stub. Do you know what those examples would be?
Yeah, some of them, I've heard from several leasing agents, what they do is they will look online or they'll search online the numbers, the addresses, they'll also do the business searches that I mentioned, just to see if those things add up. And another one was actually look at the year to date and the pace, like the numbers that they actually get paid, and see if they kind of like add up. Sometimes when they go and create those fake pay stubs online, and then there's a fee to pay to remove the watermark. Sometimes they'll say they're fake behind it, but you pay like a $5, $10, $20 fee and remove that watermark so it actually looks real now. But sometimes those numbers don't add up automatically. So it's like, year to date, it's only January, but they made $80,000. That doesn't really add up.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. That's super helpful. Really quick, I'd like to go back to the CPN topic. We have someone who asked or stated that they required an applicant bring in a physical copy of their social security number and W-2. She refused, claimed it was illegal. Is it illegal?
As far as I know, it is not. Obviously, again, I'm not an attorney or anything, but I have not heard that it is illegal to request for copies of the Social Security card, or W-2, or even copies of their taxes or anything like that to verify income, particularly in cases where you're already getting alerts where things are not coming up. I have not heard that, before. That's the first time. We can certainly look into that further. But yeah, so look for that. Another thing we've heard is if they don't have their Social Security card, is getting a copy of the letter from the Social Security Administration office to where it'll actually say that their Social Security number is legitimate, and people try to fake that as well. And one of the things that kind of just stands out with that is if it shows the full 9-digit social. Usually when the SSA supplies that letter, they truncate it. So you'll see a lot of X's, like the first 5 digits, and then you'll see the last 4.
Okay.
So that's maybe a little trick to look for. But also, I got a question over there if we can repeat the website for Texas for that business search.
Yes.
It's the Texas Comptroller.
Comptroller, the Texas Comptroller.
Yes.
Um,
And if it's out of state, it's usually the Secretary of State. So if it's like someone or maybe a business in Oklahoma, then you look for Oklahoma Secretary of State.
And let's see. I guess this is a pretty helpful question. Can you report fraudulent applicants to the police? And if not, who?
Okay. And the answer to that is yes. So multiple different things. Falsifying an ID, whether it's state, federal, whatever, is actually a misdemeanor. I believe it's called fraudulent use of a driver's license. They may call it different things in different states or jurisdictions. Same thing with not even changing or updating your address within a certain time can be a misdemeanor. So it's almost like a traffic violation. But the answer to the question is yes. And the police departments will actually encourage that you can turn people over. The problem for them is also their bandwidth to deal with it. So they are already shorthanded. So a lot of times if they don't have enough information to go on, it kind of just goes to the bottom of the stack. So what some of the police officers and detectives have suggested to me at some of these trainings that we've done over the past few years in Houston is if you could help provide other information, because if you give them their fake ID, information's already fake, so they don't have much to go on. But a lot of properties have security cameras, so maybe you have a copy of their driver's or their license plate number on their car that may help them track that down. So additional information is always helpful when reporting that, and then that better helps the police departments and their detectives, track that down and report it over to the police.
Very smart. I think that is going to be very helpful to property managers. So let's talk about, well, before we get into the services, how would you handle applicants, since we're dealing, we're in the time of unemployment, where some managers are seeing applicants put down unemployment as their proof of income.
Okay.
How would you handle that?
That is a great question. And the first thing I would probably say there is refer back to your company, and as far as like if they have a policy about this or not. But the way to kind of think about it is, some states are different, and sometimes in different economic situations, this changes. But under normal conditions, you only get about, I believe it's 26 weeks of unemployment. And I believe the max you can get per week, so I believe the weekly payment amount can go up to about 500 or 521, I believe is the max. So when you kind of multiply that out, they're only going to get that for maybe half a year, so pretty much a 6-month lease. And the maximum amount that they'll get is, what, $13,000, and that's if they're getting the max. So if you kind of break that out over a year time, $13,000 over a year may not necessarily meet your 3-to-1 threshold that you may have as far as your screening criteria. Even if we kind of just look at it as a 6-month lease, once you hit about, if your rent's, let's just call it about $700, you're probably already around that maximum 3-to-1 rent to income ratio if all they're supplying is unemployment income as their income. It is a source of income, even though it is limited. Now there is a benefit right now. I believe you can get about 4 months of $600 for COVID-19 relief. But again, I believe that's only for 4 months.
It's a good, valid points. Thank you. Now let's get into the services, some services that a supplier or a company could offer that would help avoid or remedy fraudulent applications.
Yeah. There are several companies out there, and we can kind of take this from the top. There are multiple companies that do an ID check to tell you if the ID is valid or the information is valid or if it's not. So there are, probably half a dozen or more of those companies out there that provide that service. That's
great in itself, that right there.
Yeah, and I believe a lot of them also integrate with the software in your online leasing workflows. So that is a great benefit to add in. Going from there to, employment and verification income services. There are some companies out there that provide it. Some of them just kind of take over the calling the employers for you. Some of them maybe just do like an online service that's immediate. And then of course the costs for those are typically a little bit more than a lot of your traditional, credit criminal screenings, but there are a handful of companies out there that do that verification of employment and income. Okay, and then as far as additional fraudulent searches, now there are probably, again, about half a dozen companies out there that offer something above and beyond what you just see on the credit report as far as Social Security number alerts. And several of them work differently. Some of them are like a multi-point like authentication. Some of them look at like the applicant data. Some of them do like facial recognition. So there's several different options that you can use. And again, it adds into your workflow for your screening. So it's not like you have to do a second screening or go here or go there, go to multiple websites. It just kind of, runs with your current screening process.
That's awesome. Because then that takes out a lot of the legwork that these on-site teams are having to do, with verifying employment and all that. So right. Are there any other services you can think of that that would help, like with fake rental history or
Yeah, I mean, there are companies that already have like the landlord's tenant court records and things like that, rental histories that are within the screening process. So it at least lets you know if there's like bad actors, versus the ones that don't have any information come back, which I guess is a little bit better. Um, there are some things outside of just like the screening side of things. So if you're looking at verification of employment and income, or you had talked about unemployment income, there are companies out there that do a kind of rent insurance. Now, I'm not talking about renter's insurance where it's like, someone starts a fire or anything like that, but actually rent insurance. And then they also have like a similar to like a bond, like a surety bond that will protect for rent. So if you do have someone that has that unemployment income as their only source of income, or also if you have someone that comes back with no social security number found or no credit report found, that a lot of times landlords will accept with conditions like with additional deposit. Well, if they go with the rent insurance or the bond service, that will kind of offset that risk if that person does default on their lease, that it makes the landlord whole on that losses that they incur.
Awesome, thank you. And you kind of just started to touch on this, but I'm going to ask you one more question that we curated, and then I'm going to take a couple or just maybe one more question from the audience. But what would you suggest on-site teams do about an applicant who doesn't have a social security number or a credit background?
Okay, good. Go ahead and run them just like you run everybody else. A lot of times what you're going to see on the credit report is you're going to have some alerts. A lot of times they'll come back with no social security number found. You might get some other ones where it's, if they put in an incorrect one versus a no social security number, could be the same thing. You might not get a credit report, but at least it'll still search for other things like criminal data, maybe some landlord history, things like that. A lot of settings with management companies and owners will have, if someone does come back with that no credit report found, that they automatically require like additional deposits, guarantors, things like that, which will go right back to what I mentioned. Sometimes that's initial, if you require a full month's deposit, if someone comes back with no social security number, then that's, that could be a big hit because they're already paying for the first month, they're paying for their application fees, among other things. Maybe pet deposits, and then asking them to come up with another full month rent could be very substantial. So maybe falling back on one of the bonds or the rent insurance kind of things will help you capture more applicants at the, like I said, transferring that risk to that rent insurance or bond.
Perfect. Thank you. So I'm going to take a question from the audience. One woman is seeing, or gentleman is seeing a lot of this credit file is less than 3 years old when the applicant is not a young applicant. Is that a sign of fraud?
Not necessarily, because you see a lot of people that are maybe like 18, 19, 20, college students, things like that. That's what they call a thin credit instead of a no credit file. So they are starting to build something out. It's just they haven't really started yet.
So if it's a 40-year-old applicant and their credit file is less than 3 years old, then would that be maybe a red flag?
That possibly raises some eyebrows there because, typically in today's day and age, it's hard to find someone, 30, 40 or even older that has a thin credit file. It is possible, but I would actually say very unlikely.
Okay. We're getting questions all of a sudden now. So we do have 6 more minutes left. Chargeback notifications. Do you know anything about that?
Okay, yes. So I'm assuming what we're talking about there is if you're using an online payment service, and then what's happening is the person comes back and says, oh, nope, those charges are not my charges on my credit card, or my ACH, and they're asking for those charges to get charged back. So I would probably defer to your payment company. So there's several out there. There's many, online payment companies to see what their policy is and if they have any fraudulent protection for those. I know a lot of them don't let you go back and dispute those charges past 30, 60-day period. But, still you guys get hit with 2 months versus chargebacks on rents because someone's saying it's fraudulent. It's not helping you out. because then you have to go and charge the resident back, and then now they owe for 2+ months. So that's what I would do, is I would just see if there's any protection for you guys with your payment companies.
Okay. How do we get rental verification from properties who say their company policy doesn't allow them to? So if a company policy states that they're not allowed to get rental verification, I guess what advice do you have for this employee?
Okay, good. Many of the screening companies, like I mentioned, they have multiple different maybe supplemental type services that kind of complement each other as far as like rental histories are concerned. One being they collect the landlord-tenant court records. One, you might have collection information off the credit report that kind of backs that up. You also have real-time data for companies that are reporting bad actors for skips and evictions. And then also there's a lot of the county courthouses that allow you to go in there and do free searches as a backup just to see if there are any additional landlord-tenant court records out there. So I believe Harris County allows you to do that. You can just go to their courthouse and do a free landlord-tenant court record search.
Perfect, thank you. And someone asked, how do we minimize this risk? I'm guessing just application fraud in general. And I would assume the best answer would to get with a company that, specializes in that, right?
Yeah, that would probably be the best course of action. I mean, we talked about some best practices because it's not always in everybody's budget to, add on additional services. But if you do have that in your budget, then yeah, reach out to, I mentioned there's companies that do the ID scans. There are, you can add on to your existing screening companies that do searches above and beyond like the traditional credit report and things like that. And then like some of the other things I had mentioned about like, transferring the risk by using rent insurance and things like that. So you have multiple options and multiple ways to protect yourself.
Yeah. And if it's not in your budget, then I guess it requires a little bit of extra legwork on the property manager side.
Right.
So,
and some of the services are paid for by the resident, so it's not necessarily coming directly out of your budget or cost.
That is helpful to keep in mind. One last question, unless we get another one before our 12:30 mark. What exactly do the Hawk alerts mean, and how are they resolved?
Okay, Hawk, I'm assuming that's like the TransUnion Social Security number alerts. That's what I'm assuming that they're asking. And that's where I was talking about before, like if they come back and they'll say things like Social Security number belongs to a deceased person. The two numbers in the middle, can't be the same. They can't be consecutive numbers. They can't be all nines, can't be all zeros. So those are kind of one of your first lines of defense, on the credit report when you see those. That something was either accidentally entered in incorrectly. Because we're only human, it could either be on the applicant side, or we've even done it on the leasing agent side where, we put something in incorrectly. It looked like a 9, but maybe it was a 4. That could cause some of those alerts. But at the same time, that could also tell you that someone has put some information in incorrectly.
Awesome. All right, I think that might be it. Let's wait just one more minute to see if anything comes in. This was all very, very helpful information, Randy.
Sure.
All right, I don't think we have, oh, here we go. One last question. For the Hawk alerts, I see it specifically over and over talking about addresses being associated with more than one person at the same address.
Okay. Yeah. So what happens there? It's talking about like there's an address and social security number mismatch. Typically the credit reports, unless you have an add-on service, report just the most recent address and possibly, I believe it's 2 additional previous addresses on the credit report. And how they get that information is when someone fills out an application for an apartment, a car loan, a mortgage, whatever the case is, you put that information down on the application, and then when your credits ran, it captures that. So it'll actually give you a time span on those addresses and when they were used. So if there's an address that's not something that the credit bureau has on that person, that it tells you that, hey, that kind of doesn't match up with that person.
Awesome. 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 Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you again, Randy, for all of your expertise today. Again, to the audience, if you have any additional questions, please reach out to myself, either at mtaylor or comm, C-O-M-M, at haaonline.org. Next week, Tuesday at noon, we will be talking about staffing solutions. So please join us next week, either on Facebook Live, Zoom, or later on YouTube. Thank you again to Randy, and make it a great day. Have a good one, everyone. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, everybody.